certainly means that the government has information about me that I might be, at least might be.
Mm. So,
and here I am. I'm running in 2016, and I've pledged to run in 2020, 2024, and 2028. So there's going to be 4 chances here in which that destiny will be possible to get the main office. But another possibility is if I continue to develop my credentials as a candidate for the president by things like my 100 proposals, maybe I'll be selected as vice president and then not succeed to the office. Or maybe I'll be selected as somebody's vice president and we won't win. Or maybe we'll win and the president will die and I'll become president. I don't know how it's going to fall together. All I know is that I can share with the American people the fact that based on our secret time travel capability, the American intelligence community has been briefing people about their destiny as future presidents and vice presidents. Because, of course, not only Bush, Clinton, Bush, and Obama, but I was present at a meal that was hosted for Richard Cheney in New Mexico, where he had been briefed on his destiny as vice president. Mm. So all I can share with the American people is that fact, that there's a briefing process that is premised on time travel that is being used to apprise specific Americans of their discrete destiny as president or vice president. I don't know if that's a wider class and includes people who never enjoy the fulfillment of that destiny or not.
So you,
when I discussed this with Gregory Kaffouri, who is a prominent personal injury lawyer in Portland, Oregon, who's appeared many times on court TV analyzing trial practice. Greg said he had been traveling when he was Oregon organizer for Ralph Nader, I think in 2000. He was in some Latin American country, and he found out from somebody who had been like agriculture secretary that this person had been informed by the Peruvian government or something that he was going to be president one day. And then this Latin American official found out that the government was like telling 30 people that and then selecting from among those 30 people. So Greg was using that to poo-poo my claim that it's as a result of the quantum access capability that's been derived from time travel that our government has had that data. But in fact, that's what was going on. They were deriving the identity of future presidents and vice presidents from quantum access that results from sending people to the future with information being sent back from the distant future that then gets analyzed, and also using chronometry. All they have to do, they don't even have to jeopardize personnel by trying to find out who's going to be president, is sworn in as president 4 years, because all they have to do is use the chronovisor to tune in the swearing-in ceremony, because the person states their own name during the swearing-in ceremony.
So, and under this scenario, you have to win the election. No, under the scenario that was described to me by my dad, I was going to be president. He didn't say you're going to be elected president. Well, I may be the vice president. But you have to get there through legitimate means, is what I mean.
Correct, and yes, I'm not parroting the claims of the conspiracists that American presidents are selected. I don't think they're selected. I think there may be a kind of a media selection of the class of credible candidates or establishment candidates from which we have usually or almost always selected the winner. But no, I don't believe that there's some committee that's sitting down and deciding, let's say, that Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump is going to win the 2016 election. I think you win it by enduring the hurly-burly of the whole, at least a year of campaigning beforehand. And that even despite the Diebold, the black box voting scandal, it's never been alleged that the winners are being selected, surreptitiously or illegally throughout the whole country, right? I mean, the black box voting scandal was limited to the Diebold machines where they could throw the switch. But it's never been alleged that the whole thing's a scam. Mm. So no, I'm not alleging that American presidents are selected. I believe they're elected. But in addition, what's been kept secret is the winners are being pre-identified by the intelligence community, utilizing the time travel technologies that emerged in the early 1970s so that they can psychologically prepare for their destinies. And I think that probably includes a wider class of people who could reach the presidency but don't. And so I don't know what my destiny is. I will either reach the presidency or I won't. But I do know what happened to me, and that is I was given information by two people with career connections to the CIA who alleged that I was going to reach the presidency. And I've met four of the men who were told years in advance, decades in advance, who have since become president. So that's pretty powerful information from my point of view.
Yeah. So you're going to have to get on your ground game.
I'm going to have to get my game together. And I'm just running in 2016. You know, I'm running to win, but I'm also recognizing that this is my first time out, and I knew nothing about the process. I knew nothing about the FEC regulations. You know, my small team and I have been really learning as from the seat of our pants. So that was our intent in 2016. Mm-hmm. I knew I had no money, no financial war chest to run, no experience. So I'm being kind of gentle on myself and saying, well, this is a learning experience. But I'm also saying that while I know the American president isn't selected, and I know I was told, I also want to be gentle myself because it's possible that I was told and that timelines have shifted, or I was told, but in that future, I had been trying to reach the presidency from the time that I was, in college, kind of like Clinton and Obama did. But who knows? Maybe I do get my game together, and as a result of convincing the American people that I'd make a great president or a good one, maybe I get elected. Maybe I'm selected. Let me give you one scenario that could happen in this election, because this would be more germane to your article, perhaps. Mm-hmm. What would happen if Hillary Clinton gets the Democratic nomination and Trump or Cruz or whoever gets the Republican? Doesn't matter. But let's say that Jesse Ventura stands by his promise to launch an independent race for the presidency in the event that Bernie Sanders does not get the Democratic nomination. Mm-hmm. Who would Jesse then select as a running mate? Well, he couldn't select a Democrat or Republican current candidate without alienating voters from the opposite party. So it's certainly within the realm of possibility that he would select me. We've met. I've been on his show. He knows I'm running. He's seen my 100 proposals, I believe, because I sent him over there. So if I now, between now and the nomination of Hillary Clinton, communicate with Governor Ventura, a possible scenario is a Ventura-Bashago ticket where we win on a plurality, or we win in the House of Representatives after a Ventura-Bashago ticket frustrates, let's say, Hillary and Trump, or Clinton or Trump, from getting 270 electoral votes. Something that's certainly possible. I don't know if it's probable,
sure,
but that's a possible outcome in 2016.
And at least get your name out there.
Well, I photograph well. I'm well educated. I'm a lawyer in private practice with 20 years of honorable experience. I'm a member of the federal bar. I've been a shadow candidate since 2012, but a declared candidate since December of last year. Mm-hmm. I have been running. I have a website. I have a platform. I don't see why I would be any less qualified than Governor Ventura turning to, let's say, and this may sound somewhat braggadocious, but he could turn to, let's say, a retired governor of a major state, or just a state. Like, let's say he could turn to, Gray Davis of California, Brian Schweitzer of Montana, or let's say Angus King of Maine, or let's say Tom Keene of New Jersey, or Jim Florio of New Jersey, and select some, proactive governor type to balance his ticket. But why couldn't he pick me as a figure in the truth movement? It would galvanize the cultural creatives. It would galvanize his vote, his supporters. It would galvanize the youth, the truth vote. I mean, that's a significant plurality of Americans.
Yeah, so have you ever talked to Alex Jones?
Say again?
Have you ever talked to Alex Jones?
No, but people have suggested I was going to try to get on Alex's program before he endorsed Trump.
I see.
I've lost respect for Alex, not because I don't think Trump would make an adequate president. In fact, I think he'd make an adequate and very interesting president, and you can quote me. But what disappointed me about Alex is Alex has always been anti-financial oligarchy. He's always been anti-New World Order and anti-corporate and anti-bankster. And I mean, Trump's a billionaire.
Yeah.
And what is he doing rushing and endorsing Trump before he interviews me, before he interviews Jill Stein of the Green Party? before he interviewed some of the libertarians. He really wasn't true to his principles with this early endorsement of Trump that Trump also got from journalists like Jeff Rentz and Jay Weidner and these other people in sort of the conspiracy right that think that Trump's the greatest thing since sliced bread. I think that Trump is a courageous man. He's probably more intelligent than he comes off in public, but I believe that he's egotistical. He makes rash judgments, and some of his policy thinking is just not just foolish, but dangerous. Like building a wall between ourselves and Mexico. I mean, we need Mexican labor. Mm-hmm. We need Mexicans to come here to staff our existing economy.
Well, I mean,
so
that's a great.
As I look. Sorry, go ahead.
That's a great way to segue into and get back on policy.
Okay.
You say that or you disagree with that approach, and do know, for your immigration policy, you are suggesting a temporary across-the-board moratorium on new immigration.
Our history. Yeah.
So
our history is to have. Sorry, go ahead.
Or how long would that go? How do you see it working? What do you hope to accomplish?
Well, I think it should be for 5 to 10 years. Mm-hmm. Now, my thinking here is that we waited 40 years between 1924 and 1965. We allowed rampant immigration from 1880 to 1924. And there was the same ethnic and linguistic balkanization that we have now. But what we did in 1924, after World War I, is we imposed a moratorium on immigration that lasted for 41 years. And then we began taking people in large numbers again in 1965. And then we introduced family reunification and so forth. Okay. So the average immigrant now, the most typical immigrant, is the brother of a previous immigrant from Latin America. Okay. Now, I believe immigration is good for the United States. It increases our labor pool. It connects us to the rest of the world through cultural and social and familial ties. And among the things that it does, it's actually good for conservatives and for the financial oligarchy, which Trump doesn't really understand, is it props up rents. Because when immigrants come into a country, they rent the worst accommodations and they support the rent system. They establish a price point below which a monthly rent, for example, for an apartment can't fall. Okay, because they're renting the worst apartments for the cheapest amount of money. Okay, so immigration is good for the country. It's bad for the country when it becomes so commonplace that it disrupts people's access to get treated at a hospital. It disrupts English as the first language of commerce and education. When our junior highs and high schools in metropolitan areas are balkanized linguistic jungles where, in the Los Angeles Unified School District, 140 languages are spoken. I mean, come on. When it crowds our freeways and every other form of mass transit.
I want to clarify on the language point. You're saying that this is an issue as far as efficiency?
No, I'm saying that from an efficiency perspective, immigration is good until it begins disrupting society in critical ways.
Like no, I mean just on the language point.
Yeah, well, for language, I endorse English as the first language of education and commerce.
Why?
Because that's the tradition of the country, that we're a polyglot country and a country that gathers in people from all over the world, but then nationalizes people under a common language. So we shouldn't tolerate so much linguistic balkanization that people aren't speaking English by the time they're in high school. When, maybe their family immigrated from Latin America when they were, in the third grade. 9 years later, by the time that they're seniors in high school, they should know English, because English should be the language that's spoken at school. I went back to my high school in suburban Los Angeles, Chatsworth High School, and 30% from a school that had been predominantly, white and English speaking. When I graduated in 1979, by the year 2000, 30% of the students at Chatsworth High School were being taught in Spanish. That's not the way to proceed. You have to establish a common language in the educational system and then in the main realm of society that people function in on a daily basis, and that's the commercial realm of society. You can't balkanize English speakers out of the primacy of English in their own country. That's not done, for example, in other countries. So when you go to an eatery and the menu is only in Spanish or some other language, that should be a violation of administrative law to do that. A business, for example, should be fined when they don't use English as the primary language and provide it in the commercial realm. Okay. Similarly, people in public life and public service should always deliver their speeches in English, because English has to possess political primacy for everybody to be acculturated into English and into Americanism, into patriotic Americanism, American citizenship. But that doesn't mean that as a threshold question, immigration is bad or we're being invaded and all these kind of scare arguments that are made. Immigration becomes bad when it becomes so commonplace that society can't cope with it, and the negatives start to outweigh the positives. And that would be things like access to medical treatment, access to hospital admissions, access to hospital beds in the healthcare area, access to English language instruction in the school system, so in the educational realm, crowded freeways. In other words, where public services that people of all backgrounds need are overwhelmed by immigration. At that point, you're being basically colonized by your immigrant class, and that doesn't work. That also causes disaffection among the natural born.
Would you agree with the opponents of someone like Trump, or ideological opponents, not just political opponents? Would you agree that the majority of the fear that's being stoked about immigration is rooted in racism?
Yes, it's at least rooted in a reactionary conservatism that seems to have a simpatico. It seems to have a toleration of racist thinking that enlightened people don't have. But I think it also, as importantly as being motivated by racist thinking, it's motivated by ignorance about the fact that immigration is, until it becomes so numerous that it's causing a disruption of essential services, immigration is good for countries. The United States has prospered. The United States may very well have won the European theater of World War II, with, of course, Russia's great contribution. We were certainly helped by having fitter soldiers, because our soldiers had more of a genetically diverse background, because they were one of the first generations, maybe the first generation, to be the result of intermarriage between different groups of European descended people and so forth. So, yes, that's another area where immigration is good for a country. But your question is it rooted primarily in racism? I would say it's half racism and it's a half a reactionary conservatism that only looks at the negatives of immigration and not the positives.
Fair enough. Great. I've got like 4 more policy questions, essentially.
Okay, fire away.
I want to know about the plan to change the CIA. Specifically, you propose an open source intelligence agency. That's something I've never heard of.
Well, you can look up the lecture that Robert D. Steele, S-T-E-E-L-E, who's a former career senior CIA officer, gave. It's on YouTube. Basically, the concept is that the existence of the CIA isn't the problem. In a hostile and dangerous world where other major nations have, massive intelligence agencies like we do, the problem isn't the CIA, and the CIA shouldn't be the dog that's always beaten, because the CIA has served this country extremely well, actually. And I'm proud to have served in the CIA, even though I wasn't paid. That's not the problem.
You mean as a child?
The Mars program was under the CIA. I wasn't officially in the CIA, but I was I was in a CIA program.
We didn't fully cover that, but like I think that I have the specifics on that story.
Yeah, the Mars Jumper program wasn't under DARPA. It wasn't under NASA. It was a CIA program. The CIA is a space agency.
And you were recruited into that program based on Project Pegasus.
Pegasus was under DARPA. And the time travel that DARPA achieved in Pegasus allowed the CIA to begin promulgating intelligence reports with future information in it. But unlike DARPA's Project Pegasus, the Mars Jumper program was a CIA program per se. It was under CIA, and then the defense contractors involved were Parsons and Lockheed Skunk Works. So, I'm not a CIA critic in the sense that I'm always blaming the CIA like people do. I think the CIA should be. I don't think the CIA should be cast, torn up in 1,000 pieces and cast at the four corners of the earth, as President Kennedy is sometimes quoted as having said. I believe the CIA has served the country exceptionally well. And I'm actually, by people who really study my truth campaign, I'm publicly faulted for saying that. It's often alleged that I'm a CIA disinformationist, but I'm not. I'm an independent whistleblower. But where the CIA and the rest of the alphabet intelligence agency has fallen down is as a result of the abuse of official state secrecy. When you get anywhere near these programs, you realize that it would make much more sense, at least for these agencies, to describe what they're working on in brief reports than keep this stuff secret. For example, look what happened with Pegasus. Pegasus was being sustained operationally by a group of people connected to the CIA who were calling in on the telephone every morning, and they were keeping the program alive verbally. In other words, there was limited top-down administration, although Harold Agnew was the federal science administrator involved for the funding and so forth. My father was directing the CIA people in the project. But Pegasus was actually collapsed like a house of cards because it was being carried on secretly with a group of intelligence community connected people just calling in every morning to say, checking in, Pegasus will be doing this, blah, blah, blah. Okay. And it actually slid sideways and collapsed as a program because of state secrecy. So state secrecy has actually jeopardized some of our most advanced intelligence operations. That shouldn't be. So in other words, Steele's idea is that it would be far superior for the CIA to become sort of like the country's leading university or think tank, where it would have the best technologies, the best people, the best equipment, the best capabilities to get the best possible information about what's going on in the world, and then publicizing it. So it still might use espionage, but it would say something like, the Red Cross confirms that not just Muammar Gaddafi has rape rooms, but 50,000 other men in Libya, something like that. And in other words, the CIA would ascertain the truth or falsity of a particular fact, and then it would reveal the source and it would be the intelligence agency for the whole country, not just for the CIA and the rest of the government.
And where would the line be drawn as far as state secrecy goes?
The line where I would draw it as an individual component and an agency component or group component. The individual component would be you wouldn't reveal things when revealing what the government it would be basically be the same thing that you would have for the reformatting of FOIA, of the Freedom of Information Act. The CIA would still withhold information when either revealing it would destroy legitimate individual or group privacy, like you might find, I don't know, during an intelligence operation that somebody's cheating on their wife. There would be no reason to release that information. That would merely impact somebody's individual privacy or impact that marriage. And then the other tenet of my doctrine for the revelation or secreting of state information would be where revealing the information would create a clear and present danger of immediate irreparable harm. So, for example, you wouldn't want the CIA operating on the basis of open source intelligence to reveal how to create some advanced weapon system, because then you'd have every terrorist group, every home hobbyist trying to do so, right? Mm-hmm. So there, just like with the use of the FOIA, there would be limits to which the CIA would be an openly sourced, an open sourcing agency, but it would be biased towards open source intelligence and the revelation of what it's learned. But in a sense, it would use the very authoritativeness that it tries to achieve within government to inform the whole society of what it learns. So let's say, using the Gaddafi example, 60 Minutes and other journalists reported that Gaddafi was basically a sexual predator, and he was selecting, just like Saddam Hussein, he was selecting particular women to have sex with that he would meet like in social functions. And he would say, like, get me her. And he was raping them in what was called his rape room. Now, let's say not only Gaddafi, but let's say 10 of his top officials also had rape rooms. If the CIA determined that as an intelligence finding that it wanted the president to know, or that it was, that it did pass on to the president, so the president knew that Gaddafi was a bad bastard who should be removed from power, so should the whole country. And so should the world. Because, for example, when we invaded Libya to, among other things, topple Gaddafi because of his abusive violations of human rights, such as the human rights of those women not to be raped by any man, much less the president of their country. When we invaded, and the rest of the world didn't know what our CIA and our president knew, that for all his benign paternalism, Gaddafi was a monster who was raping Libyan women and had been for years, for decades. We jeopardized our military operation, and we harmed our reputation internationally. If, on the other hand, we had a CIA that was operating on the basis of open source intelligence, everybody who could read a newspaper on Earth or visit the internet and get news from the internet would have known that Gaddafi was a monster who deserved to be taken out. And we were the country taking him out. We were the one who was going to go and topple the rapist of Benghazi, the rapist of Tripoli. But instead, the entire developing world, the rest of Africa, and the non-aligned African countries, plus the socialist countries around the world, plus potential adversaries in the United States, such as China, all those countries that were outside the Western intelligence framework or community, they may have had information from their own intelligence agents, but they were free to propagandize what happened against the United States when we invaded Libya, because we hadn't publicized the fact, we hadn't published the fact that interpersonally and in terms of adhering to the criminal code, Gaddafi was a monster. Okay, so that's just one example of where operating on the basis of open source intelligence and a bias towards transparency rather than secrecy would have strengthened our military action in Libya, politically, militarily, and otherwise.
I think a lot of, well, I can't say for sure of most people, but a lot of people would agree that, the government abuses, statuses of like classified information or like this is for national security. Like, how would that abuse be curtailed in this situation? I mean, you do still allow for secrecy based on a clear and present danger. Like, what is to stop someone from just abusing that?
Well, see, the clear and present danger, of immediate irreparable harm, that is the national security prong of the doctrine. So, for example, you would reveal that Gaddafi was a serial rapist, but you wouldn't announce the moment of our troop deployments, right? You wouldn't say, a day from, 24 hours from now, we're gonna invade Libya. You would do what President George H.W. Bush did when we were in Desert Storm, is, our forces are now deployed in this military operation. And so you still have the advantage, for example, of tactical military surprise. So I'm not urging that. See, here's my thinking on this, and that is, and having worked in 2 technical projects or experiential projects that connected to the intelligence community, I saw how this was operating, although I was obviously at a pretty young age when it was. But what's happening is the legitimate uses of secrecy, namely to protect privacy, to protect national security, they were the original reason for the state secrecy, but then the state secrecy just becomes part of the governmental culture. The secrecy just becomes standard operating procedure. It calves off from and doesn't relate anymore to sacrosanct values like protecting privacy or protecting national security. It's just what's done. And it's done to give the powerful advantage over the rest of members of our society. But I believe that it's that state secrecy that's abused beyond the legitimate uses of it to protect privacy, to protect national security, becomes sociopathic. You see?
And how do you stop
I'm talking about something that like the semiotics of secrecy itself. The secrecy was originally adopted for reasons like to protect individual and group privacy, to protect national security, to protect our military preparedness or military operations, or immediately incipient military operations like the invasion of Normandy would be an example. Those were legitimate uses of state secrecy.
Well,
the fact that somebody's the target of a criminal prosecution. But what's happened is a permanent secret government of alphabet intelligence agencies has emerged in which a whole different understanding of reality is shared on a catch-as-catch-can basis with a group of intelligence officials. In fact, the individual intelligence officials themselves don't all have total knowledge of what total information awareness, as President George W. Bush called it. That's why he asked Admiral John Poindexter, to head up the Total Information Awareness Program at DARPA. Okay, in other words, part of the pathology of this is that because it led to the evolution of a permanent secret government in which official state secrecy is standard operating procedure, even intelligence officials themselves have partial information. Even the president has partial information. And that simply means that state secrecy has been abused so much that it's actually jeopardizing the quality of the leadership that government can deliver to protect and to extend the interests of the American people.
So, but how do you curtail the abuse is what is my main issue. I want to know.
Well, I mean, a president or other executive official who violated the doctrine would be subject to prosecution, and that would be a felony, and that would be an impeachable offense. You know, if
no, I mean not the president's abuse, the intelligence agencies themselves abuse.
Well, how would they be abusing it any more than a major news organization if they were wrong? There's always the opportunity to abuse information that's revealed. It may not be true.
No, I mean,
right? The fact that that's so I don't know how you're contemplating it would be abused in a worse situation than always utilizing or abusing state secrecy to keep a lot of what's significant in the world secret. Look, the national security exemption to FOIA has been used extensively to do that.
Yeah, that's where I don't know what to do. Is the situation is the national security exemption is abused for FOIA constantly. As long as there is a way to keep
I see what you're saying. Yeah, I see what you're saying. Well, you know, there could be review courts. Maybe we could use the FISA courts to review on a case-by-case basis which secrets should be kept. That would be a way of taking that decision out of the hands of the executive branch. If you required if Congress stipulated that the executive branch has to brief a FISA court and get a FISA judge's permission to conceal something, then that would take the onus of the decision away from the executive and indemnify the executive branch officials from being prosecuted for violating the non-disclosure doctrine. But also, it would put a judge's decision-making around the non-disclosures, you know, the privacy issues, the national security issues. I would trust judges to do that before I would trust power-hungry executive branch officials who are subject to election. You know, so
well, I know that you're a supporter. I know you're a supporter of Edward Snowden. do you think that even in that situation, like that FISA courts need some sort of reform? Because, as far as we can tell, FISA courts broke down and did not, represent the will of the people.
I agree. I agree. This is an area of subtle public policy argument and formulation. But I'm simply saying that if we move towards the CIA being more transparent, it's going to help people just in basic ways. Let's say that the chances of a global coastal flooding event in our lifetimes, the next 50 years or whatever, is 50%.
Mm-hmm.
If that, no matter how many lives that saves, lives saved from drowning in a mass flooding event, of people who decide to move from, Los Angeles, California to Denver, Colorado at a mile high, every life that would be saved by that transparency would be a public good. It would be a good use of government. So I'm just saying that, by and large, transparency is good and secrecy is bad. Secrecy is only good in areas where revelation would be toxic for some reason.
Mm.
And that's not how we govern society. But what we do is we've created a permanent secret government that operates as this own kind of, epistemological realm where some people will get highly discreet and unusual information about world subjects, and the rest of the society is beggared for information. And that's, basically you have this epistemological fiefdom of the permanently employed intelligence, military, and other executive personnel whose understanding of reality is so advanced it would be viewed as science fiction to the general population.
Mm.
Look at the time travel secret as an example of that.
Right.
Everybody's seen Star Trek and been misinformed about how teleportation can be done in a way and has been done in a way that leads to the physical survival of the teleportee. But nobody's been told, until I came along, nobody was told the truth of how we were actually doing it so that the teleportee survives.
So
teleportation.
Your outlook on this specific policy is that it'll get better as it goes.
That, yeah, the farther and farther that the Cold War gets behind us, and the better and better that we equip the CIA to be kind of like the super university of the country. And by the way, the CIA has been infiltrating academic departments for decades. So I'm not really urging something that revolutionary
mm-hmm.
to consider the CIA the super university. That if it had information about, for example, the leader of a nation state violating civil rights and human rights, I think it would over time evolve into a situation where we would understand what the true function of government is, and that is to alert the population to the way the world really is, except where there's the countervailing value at stake, like privacy or national security per se.
Mm-hmm.
But where do we begin preserving, for example, protecting national security? Well, I would do it at, the clear and present danger standard. So I wouldn't just say, oh, well, we should always be revealing things. No, there's clearly times when it would be foolish and precipitous to reveal something.
So,
let's say we know that China is planning a nuclear bombardment of us, and we also know that we have Star Wars weaponry to take down every last missile that they shoot at us. Okay. I'm not sure that has to be revealed if the survival of the country hinges on it.
Mm.
Things like that. But those are decisions that I think maybe the presidency should petition a FISA court to answer, something like that.
I think I understand.
So that the statute is implemented in a way that goes beyond politics and actually involves true government.
So, moving on to, all right, we're gonna cover protection of species. First off, I'll be able just both.